Loneliness is a feeling that we've all felt at some point. Today is Mother's Day, and I often think back on the many thankless and lonely activities that so many mothers do. The shopping, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the escorting children, and so much more. Not to say that some dads don't do these things too, but being a parent can feel lonely. So celebrate your mother today and every day. Thank the mothers in your life that do all of the work in the background so that you can be the best person possible. Let me tell you a quick story about a boy and his mother. There was this young boy who, while searching through some old boxes, stumbled across an old dusty Bible. And he started looking through the big old family Bible with fascination. And as he was carefully turning these old pages, something fell out. He bent down and he picked it up and he looked at it closely. It was an old leaf from a tree that had been pressed between the pages years ago. He yelled, "Mama, look what I found." "What did you find, dear?" she cried back. And he called excitedly, "I found Adam's suit." Our whole church has been journeying through the story of the Bible together. Starting at the very beginning in chapter 1, where Adam and Eve made their first suit out of fig leaves because they were ashamed of their sin, which ruined God's plan to live in fellowship with us. But God starts giving us clues as to the lengths that God will go in order to bring us back, to get us out of our loneliness and isolation because of sin. And God replaces their fig leaves with animal skins, letting us know that in order to cover our sins and get us back into right relationship, it's going to take the shedding of some blood. Our story of Daniel today starts with the result of many generations of sinning and turning from God. Loneliness. All of Judah, all of the southern kingdom, has been captured and exiled by the Babylonians. And the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar is a fairly wise king. So instead of dooming all the people of Judah to toil away in prisons and with manual labor, he picks the best and the brightest to serve in his palace. 4 of these chosen were Daniel and 3 other young men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Not only were these men removed from the chosen nation, but they were told they couldn't serve Yahweh anymore. And to make sure they knew they were different now, they were given new names. Belteshazzar for Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for the others. These were lonely times for God's chosen. We start to see how lonely of an existence this is when King Nebuchadnezzar has a giant golden statue of himself made and orders that everyone in all of his kingdom worship that statue. On the story, page 254, we can read, "Then the herald loudly proclaimed, 'Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of God that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace.'" Guess what these men of God did? They disobeyed this earthly king. And this greatly angered Nebuchadnezzar. And he followed through on his threat and told them that he alone could save them from this furnace, but that they worshipped another god. And how would another god save them from this punish that he's about to hand out? On the story, page 255, we read their response to him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." As you can imagine, this response didn't go over well. The king ordered that the furnace be heated 7 times more than normal, and then the men were thrown in. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted in God and defied the king's command to worship his idol, willing to give up their lives rather than worship anything other than God. There's a story that says the instructor of a company-sponsored first aid course asked one of the workers, "What is the first thing you would do if you found out you had rabies?" And without pause, the worker responded, "Bite my supervisor." God instructs us to work as if we are serving God alone. So if we have people above us that we struggle with, we can rise above it all and give our best because we're ultimately serving God. But when we are asked to do something that violates our devotion to God, that violates our faith, we must refuse and be willing to suffer the consequences. God does save these men. And many theologians say that when the king looks into the furnace and sees 4 people instead of 3 people that he threw in, that the 4th was the Spirit of Jesus. Others say it was an angel. I say it doesn't matter who or what it was, because God's presence was clearly with these men because they served God over anyone and anything else. Even when faced with death, they said, even if God doesn't save us, we still won't worship someone or something else. Daniel is somehow absent from all of this, but we learn that he too never will worship an idol, only God. After Nebuchadnezzar dies and his kingdom is lost, as foretold by Daniel in interpreting the king's dreams, another king rules, and he likes Daniel and sees great ability in him, so he keeps him around. But some people were jealous and hated Daniel because he was so good at ruling that King Darius was thinking of making him ruler over the nation. So they conspired. And on the story, page 258, we read, "Finally these men said, 'We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God.'" So they went to the king and told him that he should decree that everyone pray only to him for the next 30 days. And as a king who thinks highly of himself, Darius agrees and thinks this is a great idea. Everybody should only be praying to him. And so their trap was set. Of course, Daniel was going to break this law, and sure enough, he did. Every day, 3 times a day, Daniel would pray to God while facing toward Jerusalem. These men camped out and they saw Daniel doing this, so they went and they told the king, and the king immediately regretted his decision but had to throw Daniel into a den of lions. And as he did, he told Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." We all know the story. Daniel survives, the king is happy, and then he throws all of the accusers plus their families into the den, and they're torn apart before they ever even hit the floor of the lion's den. These 4 young men, who were forced from their homes, told not to worship their God or keep their heritage, were found in a lonely place as a result of sin. But they did something different. They pushed against their world. They stopped living in that cycle of sin, and they lived honorable lives of serving God even when many of us would give up. And by doing so, not giving in to sin but always seeking God, they transformed some people around them. Both King Nebuchadnezzar and King Darius see something in these boys, and that something was God at work. They both had similar proclamations when these young men were spared death. King Nebuchadnezzar says on the story, page 256, "Then Nebuchadnezzar said, 'Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way.'" And on the story, page 259, we can see King Darius's reaction to Daniel surviving the lion's den. We read, "Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, 'May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. This week's story of Daniel and his friends is really more like ours than some of the other stories we've covered. In 1 Peter 1:1, where our story begins to unfold, we can read, "To God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia." This text identifies Christ followers, identifies us as strangers in the world. Daniel's hometown was Jerusalem, and our hometown is the New Jerusalem, which Jesus is constructing for followers of Christ. Peter says we are aliens and strangers in the world, and Jesus tells us to be in the world, but not of the world. In 1 Peter 2:11, we read more instructions about how to do that. We can read, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul." We must abstain from the sin of this world. So to live in the world but not of the world, we must first be careful not to get sucked into the lifestyle of this world. When we fall to sin and become consumed with the idols of our day, we move away from God and Christ, and that moves those around us away too. Look at the people who convinced the kings to persecute Daniel and his friends. It didn't end well for them. And second thing we must do is live a life that points others to God. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do this, and by being faithful, those around them begin to see God too. I'm amazed at how quickly the kings send praises to God when they see God at work. When we are faithful and point others to God, entire cultures and communities can change. We can actually start to build toward God's kingdom. Which brings us back to mothers. On Jada's first Thanksgiving with us, we have a picture of Tara holding her that always makes me smile. Jada is only a week old, and the joy in Tara's face is overwhelming to me. It's the joy of motherhood, that joy of parenthood, that joy of loving another so unconditionally, that joy that you don't know that you could even have until you have a child. And this love that flows out of us is only a glimpse of God's love for us. We are foreigners and exiles in this world, but when we move home to God, we are greeted by a love that nothing in this world can match, a love that overwhelms us, a love that can defeat the fiery flames of sin, a love that can defeat those hungry lions' dens that seem to consume us in our lives, this love of God that is so great and that fills us so much. When we come home to God, we feel this love that is so overpowering that we can't help but to share that love with others. So today and every day, thank the mothers in your lives because they give you a glimpse of that love, just a fraction of that love that God extends to you. May you accept that love, and may you share that love.